The desert wind howled, carrying whispers of miracles and doom. In a remote compound, bathed in the glow of flickering torches, a man in white robes stood before a rapt crowd, his voice a siren's call. "I am the light of salvation," he declared. Hands raised as followers wept and reached for him. They called him the prophet, a healer who could banish death itself. But the unmarked graves hidden in the dunes told a different story. Devotees who believed in his touch, only to perish in silence. Miles away, Keanu Reeves, haunted by the loss of his old friend Sarah to the prophet's lies, slipped on a worn leather jacket and tucked a blade into his boot. His dark eyes burned with purpose. He wasn't here to believe. He was here to end it. Keanu Reeves' motorcycle roared across the cracked desert highway, the horizon shimmering like a fever dream. The tip had come from a desperate letter, scrawled by a young woman named Lila, smuggled out by a defector who had fled the compound. "He's chosen me next," Lila wrote, her handwriting shaky. "I'm scared. Please, someone, stop him." Keanu's jaw tightened as he folded the letter, creased from his grip, and tucked it into his pocket. Lila was still alive, but time was slipping away. The prophet's healings were public spectacles, displays of divine power that left his chosen followers exalted, then dead within days, their deaths blamed on their lack of faith. Sarah had been one of them, her bright laugh silenced forever. Keanu wouldn't let Lila become another ghost. He ditched the bike behind a dune and approached the compound on foot, blending into the stream of pilgrims trudging toward the prophet's sanctuary. The air buzzed with fervor, a mix of hope and desperation that clung to the crowd like dust. Keanu pulled his hood low, his dark eyes scanning the faces around him. The prophet's guards, clad in white with cold, unblinking stays, patrolled the perimeter, their hands resting on concealed weapons. Keanu's heart thudded, not from fear, but from a weight of what he'd come to do. Find Lila, expose the fraud, and get out before the prophet's spell turned the crowd into a mob. The compound was a sprawling maze of tents and makeshift structures, all centered around a massive canvas cathedral where the prophet held court. Keanu slipped inside, the air thick with incense and the hum of chanting. The prophet was younger than Keanu expected, no older than 30, with a disarming smile and eyes that seemed to pierce souls. His white robes glowed under the lanterns, and his voice carried a hypnotic cadence. "Who among you seeks salvation?" he called, and hands shot up, voices pleading. Keanu spotted her, Lila, pale and trembling, her auburn hair tied back, standing near the stage. The prophet's gaze locked onto her, and the crowd parted like a sea. "You, my child," he said, his voice haunted. "You are chosen." Keanu's hand twitched toward the blade hidden in his boot. He had to act fast, but one wrong move would doom them both. The prophet's charisma was a weapon, and the crowd was his army. As Lila stepped forward, her eyes wide with equal parts awe and terror, Keanu slipped through the throng, whispering to himself, "Stay sharp. She's counting on you." The prophet raised his hands over Lila, and the tent erupted in cheers. Keanu was close now, close enough to see the faint smirk on the prophet's lips. This wasn't faith, it was a performance, and Lila was the next act in a deadly play. Keanu had one chance to break the script, but the clock was ticking, and the prophet's eyes were already searching the crowd, as if he sensed an intruder in his paradise. Keanu melted back into the crowd, his heart pounding as he watched Lila ascend the stage. The prophet placed a hand on her forehead, his voice rising in a theatrical prayer. "Through me, the divine flows," he proclaimed, and Lila swayed, her eyes fluttering. The crowd gasped, some falling to their knees. Keanu's stomach churned. He'd seen this before. Sarah had swayed the same way, her face glowing with hope, only to collapse days later, poisoned by whatever the prophet slipped into his holy elixirs. Keanu needed proof. He couldn't just grab Lila and run. The guards would cut him down, and the crowd would tear him apart. He needed to find the source of the prophet's so-called miracles, the elixirs, the rituals, anything that could expose the truth. Slipping out of the tent, he moved toward the compound's inner sanctum, a heavily guarded cluster of tents where only the prophet's inner circle was allowed. The guards were distracted, their eyes on the spectacle, giving Keanu a narrow window. He crouched behind a stack of crates, listening as two guards muttered nearby. "Another one tonight," one said, his voice low. "The elixir's ready. She won't last a week." The other chuckled darkly. "They never do." Keeps the prophet's pockets full. Keanu's blood ran cold. The elixir wasn't just a prop. It was a murder weapon. He had to find it. Using the shadows, Keanu slipped into a smaller tent marked with the prophet's symbol, a radiant sun. Inside, the air was sharp with the scent of chemicals. A table held vials of a shimmering liquid, labeled with names and dates. One caught his eye. Lila, chosen, April 20th. Tomorrow. Keanu pocketed the vial, his mind racing. He needed to test it, but there was no time to get it to a lab. He'd have to confront the prophet directly, but first, he had to get Lila out. As he turned to leave, a shadow loomed in the doorway. One of the prophet's lieutenants, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, stared at him. "You don't belong here," the man growled, reaching for a radio. Keanu moved like lightning, his fist connecting with the man's jaw. The lieutenant crumpled, but the radio crackled to life, a voice demanding, "Report." Keanu crushed it under his boot, but the damage was done. Alarms blared across the compound. Keanu sprinted back toward the main tent, the vial burning a hole in his pocket. The crowd was still in trance, unaware of the chaos brewing outside. Lila was kneeling now, the prophet's hands on her shoulders, his voice a crescendo. Keanu pushed through the throng, ignoring the angry murmurs. "Lila," he hissed, close enough for her to hear. Her eyes flicked toward him, confused but alert. "Trust me, we're leaving." Before she could respond, the prophet's gaze snapped to Keanu. "An unbeliever," he shouted, his voice dripping with venom. "Seize him." The crowd hesitated, torn between devotion and confusion, but the guards didn't. 4 of them closed in, their batons raised. Keanu dodged the first swing, his training kicking in. He wasn't just an actor. He'd spent years studying martial arts, honing his body and mind for moments like this. A guard lunged, and Keanu sidestepped, sending him crashing into another. "Lila, now!" Keanu yelled. She stumbled to her feet, breaking free of the prophet's grip. The prophet's smile faltered, replaced by a snarl. "You'll burn for this," he spat. But Keanu was already moving, grabbing Lila's hand and pulling her toward the exit. The crowd was waking up, some shouting in anger, others in fear. The guards were regrouping, and the prophet's voice boomed, rallying his followers. "Stop them. They defile the divine." Keanu and Lila burst out of the tent, the desert night swallowing them. The compound was alive with chaos, guards shouting, torches flaring, the prophet's voice still echoing through speakers. Keanu led Lila toward the dune where he'd hidden his bike, his mind racing. They weren't safe yet. The prophet wouldn't let them go easily, not with a vial in Keanu's pocket threatening to unravel his empire. As they reached the dune, Lila gasped, "Who are you?" Keanu swung onto the bike, pulling her behind him. "Keanu Reeves," he said, revving the engine, "and I'm here to make sure you live." The bike roared to life, kicking up sand as they sped into the darkness, the prophet's screams fading behind them. But the reprieve was short-lived. Headlights pierced the night, and the roar of engines filled the air. The prophet's guards were in pursuit, their jeeps tearing across the desert. Lila clung to Keanu, her voice trembling. "They'll kill us." Keanu's eyes narrowed, his focus razor-sharp. "Not tonight." He swerved the bike off the main path, weaving through a labyrinth of dunes. The jeeps were faster, but the bike was nimbler. Keanu's years of stunt riding paid off as he navigated the treacherous terrain, sand spraying around them. A guard leaned out of a jeep, firing a pistol. The shot went wide, but Keanu felt the heat of it. He pushed the bike harder, the engine screaming. "We need cover!" Lila shouted. Keanu spotted a narrow canyon ahead, its walls jagged and tight. It was a risk. The bike could handle it, but one mistake would trap them. "Hold on," he yelled, steering into the canyon. The walls closed in, the jeeps forced to slow as they struggled to follow. Keanu's heart pounded, but his hands were steady. The canyon opened into a wider basin, and Keanu spotted a cluster of abandoned mining shacks. He killed the engine, pulling Lila behind a rusted shed. The jeeps rumbled closer, their lights sweeping the area. Keanu pressed a finger to his lips, signaling Lila to stay quiet. She nodded, her eyes wide but trusting. Keanu peeked around the shed, counting 3 jeeps and at least 8 guards. They were spreading out, searching. He weighed his options. Fighting was a last resort. Too many, too armed. But the vial in his pocket was their ticket out. If he could get it to the authorities, the prophet's reign would crumble. "We need to move," Keanu whispered. "There's a town 50 miles east. We get there, we're safe." Lila nodded, but her face was pale. "What's in the vial?" she asked. Keanu's jaw tightened. "Proof is a murderer." Before she could ask more, a guard shout cut through the night. They'd been spotted. Keanu grabbed Lila's hand, pulling her toward the bike. The guards were closing in, their boots crunching on the gravel. Keanu started the engine, but a jeep blocked their path, its headlights blinding. "End of the line!" a guard shouted, raising a rifle. Keanu's mind raced. He couldn't outrun a bullet, but he could outthink them. "Stay low," he told Lila, then gunned the bike toward the jeep. The guard fired, the shot grazing Keanu's arm. Pain flared, but he didn't flinch. At the last second, he swerved, using the bike's momentum to skid under the jeep's chassis, scraping through the dirt. The guard scrambled, unprepared for the move. Keanu righted the bike and sped toward the open desert, Lila's arms tight around him. The jeeps gave chase, but Keanu had bought them time. Blood trickled down his arm, but he ignored it. Lila's voice was steady now. "You're crazy," she said, almost laughing. "You're welcome," Keanu replied, a faint smile breaking through. The town was their goal, but the prophet's reach was long. Keanu knew this was just the beginning. The vial was a weapon, but the prophet was a hydra, cut off one head, and another would grow. For Lila, for Sarah, Keanu would fight until the truth burned brighter than the prophet's lies.